thanks for being here. For background, I'm a lifelong Utah resident. I'm a natural science journalist. I'm published with National Geographic, ESPN, and the History Channel. I'm reporting as a journalist about the Salt Lake County as the most valuable place on earth. I began my search and sort of study from that basis, from a mining angle. I witnessed firsthand the land exchanges in the Salt Lake Summit and the Tooele counties during the 1980s, when large areas of public land were transferred into private ownership prior to modern and cultural resource protection such as NAGPRA. NAGPRA, we'll talk about that a little bit, this thing called NAGPRA. But today my goal is not to revisit those decisions, but to sort of research how sites documented before modern law were, can be viewed within the planning framework of today. So today the goal is to introduce a small set of documented shoreline caves and native burial sites known as the Black Rock Caves. And I want to summarize what the published record says and summarize what the experts say to kind of clarify and correct the modern objective process concerning native burials. We'll cover a little bit about NAGPRA. I'm not a legal professional. I know about a lot of reason why I'm here today is to better understand all of that. But what happened is that this slide came up, and it was alarming because this represented in June what was available for immediate sale in a Senate bill. Was withdrawn, and what you see here are areas where the experts say that there could be native burial sites, and I've marked those with this little thing here. The exclamation point, Dead Man Cave, right here on the Salt Lake side, Black Rock that splits the county line, and then you have the Black Rock Caves, the whole sort of group of them that are on either side of the county lines, like Tooele County and Salt Lake. And then there's some other that I've talked about, Tooele. I, by the way, had a presentation with Tooele much similar to this, and I'm hoping that we'll all be able to follow up after that. Now, what are we talking about? The Native American Graves and Protection and Repatriation Act, or NAGPRA, was enacted in 1990. It promotes a dialogue and responsible handling when human remains are known or likely, and especially in cases where earlier research predates the modern standards. The law is also designed as a protection from the unknown and unplanned events like toxic spills, vandalism, and earthquakes. We surprisingly have had some earthquakes recently, and so there is a risk that has risen to these areas, and under some cases they're on private. The ownership has changed, and so there's this risk that has risen to these areas, and the probability for catastrophe has also risen. And so part of what I want to do today is better understand what we can do to protect these places that we thought were going to be there forever. I was literally studying these. I sent a message to Kennecott on the 17th of March about the caves and was trying to see if we could get a group together to go down and take some pictures and do something super casual. I was very new at this. The next day was the 5.7 earthquake, less than 24 hours after my request. Blew me away because I thought, those things will be there forever, and they just weren't. Anyway, I don't know. People, Millie and Tooele wasn't completely aware of these caves, so I'm hoping that maybe I can give you some, tell you a little bit about what's been going on here. That what you saw here is that today's message is rooted in the stated values of the mine. We're talking about NAGPRA, but I'm not trying to hold anybody accountable to those kind of standards. They have the safety first slogan, or it's your safety, think about it. And so we already have those guardrails in place. We already have the notion that Kennecott talks about to illuminate the natural world and our place, the humans within it. But you can see right here is where Dead Man Cave is. We'll talk about Dead Man Cave. And up above, this is the ridge of, this is the building we just saw. And so this is the impoundment. And so you can see the Dead Man Cave is one of the lower caves that if there is a breach, if there's a problem there, it's going to be the first place to know about it. And there are human remains in that cave right now at this time.
And John, who owns that property?
It's on the Rio Tinto property, right off the. But again, it's not particularly clear because there is a Daughters of Utah Pioneers plaque there, and there's some, there's no access, but the ownership's definitely Kennecott in probably a lot of these cases. But as far as access, maybe there's some room. Here's what they're saying. They're saying that transparency, they want the transparency so that we can have fact-based conversations. Right now, they're just really subjective, and we're just not really very sure. And so we want to find better ways. We want to minimize the impacts. We want people to better understand our humanity. And so because we care for one another, it's the same, we have these same values. And so we want ultimately to prevent the incidents and the injuries because they're preventable, so that the focus is managing and eliminating risks is really what we're looking at here. Very narrow, very objective, and it works for planners, works for everybody. We have the 201 corridor, we have the railroad going through there, we have vandalism, and the caves that we're talking about today are wide open. In fact, they've always been wide open. When the pioneers came in 1847, they immediately recreated at Black Rock. They literally walked another 15 miles after walking across the United States, and they walked down to Black Rock, and they immediately found these caves, and were very curious about what they found. It was a little bit later they found Dead Man's Cave, or Dead Man Cave, I pointed out, that is right, coincidentally, perfectly east-west with this rock here. You may have seen in the news recently that Black Rock got a little flag, a little decoration. But today's discussion isn't intentionally narrow, it's non-judgmental. It mostly comes from published archaeological work, from the Rio Tinto standards and from federal law. And so I'm not making any new claims or trying to make any new requirements on anybody. The aim is to introduce this small number of documented sites and a historical record around them so that planners like you can better understand how the county lands might be valued going forward. This is really remarkable if you can see that. This is from the Smithsonian study in the 1930s. This is a very remarkable cave, and it's been called notably almost perfect. But it does have an irregular ceiling, so they all called it Giant's Cave, and they invited tourists to come visit Giant's Cave and find the bones of giants that once roamed the area. And so there were some problems. They found an infant burial. They also found this sort of specialized nook that's very interesting. What it is that from a planning context anyway, these sites are part of a broader cluster of caves and burial sites and shoreline features. They have high probability of native burials and a high probability of preventable destruction from continued vandalism and earthquakes and industrial accidents, 201 and the railroad. Here we see Dead Man Cave. It's, as I said, coincidentally perfectly aligned with Black Rock over here. Here's the county line that splits it. And then here's all of the caves. And I've got some descriptions down here that I've added. It's from the study, but I've just kind of put them in a different font here to give you sort of a general idea of what's going on. And there's petroglyphs, too, that were also found here. Julian Stewart was this archaeologist from the Smithsonian that came here in 1931. These caves were, covered by the Lake Bonneville, right? And the water that's out there right now is the last of Lake Bonneville. So inside of these caves is lake fill from the lake, from Lake Bonneville. And what it did is it covered one group of people And then another group of people came in and did stuff on top of those people that were 2 feet below them. 2 different cultures. What he discovered was the 2 different cultures, and he wasn't ready for it. He thought he was just going to go see the hunter-gatherers, but when he found that other strata, this lower strata, he realized that those are people that could be before Lake Bonneville, before the Ice Age. They could be people that we haven't documented or accounted for at all in the story of humanity. We're calling the bones that he ended up looking at the first peoples, is what they looked at on top of that. And then they left this area alone and said, they left it intact so that a future study could be done properly, and then that, study has not occurred. Here's the hillside. It might look familiar to you as you're driving there to Tooele, just at the sign for, I think, 101 miles to the left up here on the hillside, you can see Black Rock Cave. It's right there. And there's a bunch of construction happening right here. And it's a wonder why one of the guys or one of the people down there on the side aren't like, hey, let's go have lunch up there. Oh boy, come home with rabies. But down here is the area inside the cave where sort of the front portion where they found the infant burial. Here's another, a little bit better look at it. The nook area, closer view, and they found an infant burial, and then they found a human, adult burial. This here is from another cave we can avoid. Again, this was colorized by AI. The photos from both of these studies are not great. This is the best. You're looking at them as good as they can get. And I think humanity deserves better, since these are the ones that are writing the story. But you know what, my opinion. Let's look at the experts. Here's what the expert, Jillian Stewart, said about that cave. The cave is almost perfectly straight, 12 to 13 feet wide, and an average of 15 feet in height. What he was trying to say is that it only varies by 8 inches in 100 feet. So it blows people away, but they still have to say that it was water, made by water. They didn't have any other reason or any other evidence to say that it was carved by anyone else, except for that there's those sort of specialized parts that look beyond the abilities of water, and if water could do that, we'd be using it to do that. Trench A is where they found that here, and you can see how beautifully these walls are, so parallel. And then in the back here is kind of what they were probably saying was the Giant's Cave, and we found tourist trash and stuff like that. The railroad wanted people to come out here because they needed money to ride the railroad. When we look at the study that was later came along in the 80s by Madsen, just before the ownership, he says, look, there was hardly any funding available. We didn't have enough for the excavation, as you can imagine. And so they came in and did just a quick salvage, is what it was, the word I was looking for. And so they published their work in Black Rock Cave Revisited. I've contacted him a number of times, and nothing has been returned. What they've said is enough. Many of the people that I'm talking about today aren't here. I'm representing them. What they have said is probably similar to what Mr. Madsen would say, is that project was limited, and it wasn't done. They didn't finish it. It's still out there, and they want to see it done. What happened is it was transferred to the mine, and then within a few years, in 1988, the company found out that this 1 billion ton, at the time the tailings pond was 1 billion tons, and that it would breach if there was a strong earthquake, and it would bury the homes in a nearby deluge of mud. Now, instead of warning people, the copper giant decided that secrecy was the best policy. So they had an agent buying up property and so forth. Well, you can see here's the earthquake down here in Green Meadows Estates. At the time, it was only a 2.2. It got them concerned. because you can see the tailings pond is right there. Now, like I said, we had an earthquake, a 5.7 earthquake on March 18th, 2020. I sent him a letter. I'm so sorry about sending him that letter, but it was pretty alarming to see that the next morning. And I had used a bunch of red dots too to show the Black Rock Caves. This is after a year here, and this is a lot of activity. There's been, from my count, close to 1,600 aftershocks. The seismologists say that this is natural. This is like porridge in a bowl. The porridge is just sloshing around in the bowl, and this is just what it does. And this is the spot that it chose. After this year and after all this seismic activity, Kennecott is asking now for an expansion to the east into wetlands and into public property. What I believe is public, because it's a flying model airplane park and asbestos place there. It's a disposal site. It's a big pyramid of asbestos. So there's some threats that I see. There's some public land. There's some native burials right here that I wanted to make sure were being looked at as this expansion project is being considered by the Army Corps of Engineers. So anyway, back to bringing this home for you. I don't want to take too much of your time, and I really appreciate all of you taking your time today about this. I could be wrong about a lot of things, and the reality is that it's just, there's just, my research has put me into so many dead ends. For example, you in the 1980s, as the lake receded like it's doing now, the graves of Native Americans started to emerge. And they were unclaimed by any of the local Paiute, Goshute, or any of the local tribes, or the Ute tribes. They didn't know who these remains were. It amounted to about 85 people, and my guess is this is going to happen again and again and again. The plan was to put them in this thing up there at the mouth of Immigration Canyon until they could figure out what they were going to do with it. But my experience and my research and stuff gives me a dead end. I can't even tell if that thing was ever even used, or if it was, for how long and for what reason, and if it's ever planning on using it again. Is it part of the protocol? What happens today if an earthquake or the receding of the lake brings up the bones of more unclaimed Native Americans? Is there a plan that is known and in place? Is probably one of the questions I would pose. Not that I need the answer for any particular reason, but just because it's a question I haven't been able to answer, and I believe it's important. You know, most of the work that I've done predates the modern cultural resource law. NAGPRA establishes how Native American graves and funerary objects are handled, but remember, it doesn't assume that people are doing wrong out there. It just requires documentation, you know, care, consultation, especially with land ownership and stuff like that, and unprecedented stuff like this. So the takeaway from a planning perspective, and I hope I'm nailing it for you. I'm not a planner, and this is my first time. I make mistakes, but I think that this takeaway is straightforward, that the Black Rock Caves are a documented cultural site with known burials and intentionally deeper deposits that have been preserved for experts, people with LiDAR, better cameras, better systems to come and find out more about our story. Neither the original archaeologist or later research have claimed final resolution. And so there could be some coordination with Tooele County and just a quick look at this to just make sure that we've done all that we can, right? And that's really what that's the goal here today. I wanted to come in and really just say thank you for what we've done. It's beautiful. I love Salt Lake County. I love it so much that I want it to be preserved. I know that it's the most valuable place. The earth opened up and gave us all the riches, and The greatest thing is undeniably the most valuable place on earth for minerals, but it's also been the story of mankind. These caves are some of the first caves ever found and have been telling the story for a long time. So I wanted to introduce these key sites, the threats they face, and what the experts have to say. I wanted to start the discussion and better understand the best practice workflow. You know, when a site has documented barrels, what are we doing? What can be done? What's the story on the repository? I want to begin considering, is it possible under the unprecedented circumstances that we're having lately with earthquakes and things to maybe ask the counties to assist approaching the mine and asking about, hey, can we revisit this? Maybe it's through the museum. Maybe it's through the University of Utah. Maybe it's David Madsen, who's down in Nevada now. I don't know. Like I said, those are questions that are way down the road that I wanted to pose, but mostly just, what would those next steps look like, and what could we do? And beyond that, I am just thrilled that you would want to listen to me yammer on about this anyway.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation. It was very informative. I didn't know about these sites, so I think this is just really helpful information, and for you to bring the issue to us. Really appreciate your time today, and that presentation was very informative and
Thank you.
Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting, John.
Thank you.
There's lots of things that don't pique our interest, but this is very.
Yeah.
I have more. I have more. If you want to I have another one or two.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
We'll be in touch.
Bye.
Thanks, John.
Thanks. It was nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Bye.